because I have an educational leadership doctorate, and somehow that qualifies me to be able to do seminars and sessions and teach every once in a while or write things. So I have a good time doing that. Vikram is right. I have a couple other topics we can talk about sometime, but let's talk about this one first and see if you guys like this one. So I don't know how many of you know about the Rome Call for AI Ethics, what that's all about, but I'm going to share my screen here with some slides that I'll bring up. And let's see here, put this on a slideshow. So hopefully you can all see the slides going. And the Rome Call for AI Ethics was basically an initiative that started back in February of 2020. And the Pope, of course, and the Vatican wanted to basically bring together some leading organizations and come up with a framework for AI ethics. Now, we're going to go kind of quick into some background, and then we'll come back to the Pope and the work that they did there and what it means. But I want to make sure that we can at least agree upon what exactly we're talking about for a couple of things. So first off, what we're not going to talk about. We're not going to really talk about the distinctions between AI or AGI, artificial general intelligence, or even augmented intelligence or extended intelligence. Those kind of things are great topics for another day for somebody else, but not for us today. So the only thing I want to try to get us to remember is that we're going to talk a lot about that AI is artificial intelligence, truly artificial, meaning it's not natural, it's not human or non-human, because the Rome Call discusses that quite a bit when they talk about how AI impacts humanity. So again, forget all those nice technical descriptions of what AI can and can't be. We'll talk about those on some other future session. I know there's at least one philosopher I think I saw attending the group here today. So we're going to talk a little bit about ethics, obviously AI ethics. So the Greek word ethikos or ethos, guiding principles for relationships. All right, this is pretty self-explanatory. Moral principles that govern a person's behavior or the conducting of an activity. Okay, so like medical ethics comes into the equation we might talk about. Or people talk about a moral code or morals. We're not going to spend hardly any time talking about the basis for ethics, but that's another really interesting discussion about AI, because what you view as AI ethics will depend greatly upon where you come from. If you come from a moral world, for example, the Judeo-Christian world, you are going to come with a set of moral ethics that governs your view of AI ethics. If you come from a Buddhist or Hindu perspective or an atheistic perspective, you may have a different set of moral perspectives, moral guidelines that guide your discussion of ethics. For our purposes, though, I want to talk about ethics in terms of the guiding principles for relationships. And so when we talk about AI ethics, we're going to talk about those relationships between humans and AI. And it sounds kind of crazy, actually, right? Like humans and AI, what possible relationships can there be? Well, the Pope actually talks about this in the remarks that his representative actually gave in the Rome Call. But this is not a static thing. When we talk about AI ethics, because AI is rapidly developing and constantly developing, it's going to be a relationship that humans have with their AI as it impacts their lives and their work. And so this is really where we're headed. So that's really just a very simple baseline. I'm sure many of you knew all about that, but I wanted to make sure we covered that and say some things are, reserved for later. All right, this is a pretty great statement about AI and computers. If moral behavior were simply following rules, we could program a computer to be moral. That makes a lot of sense to me. This gentleman here, Samuel Ginder, you might have heard of him. He was a naval aviator, eventually became involved in computers to some extent. So, and maybe you know more background about him, but for our purposes, this is truly correct. If it was that easy, we would just say, okay, make the computer programming moral or make it ethical. Well, we know already just from some baselines that that's not possible. We have a lot of bias that comes in. We have a lot of issues that come in as we write the code for computers to follow when we talk about algorithms. So one comment off the start is that people tend to seek morality, or at least relationships based on a set of morals. If there's no moral framework or no social contract, perhaps, regarding people and how they deal with each other, then there's really not much of a relationship. And I'd like to say even an anarchist believes in something. They believe in anarchy. They believe in the lack of relationships or the lack of governance over them. So generally, people believe that there should be principles that govern relationships, which can be seen in our civil and criminal codes, societal and cultural norms, etc. Right? So when humans began creating and adopting and using AI, we started expecting that our AI would follow some of these morals, codes, and norms. Of course, sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But as I stated before, the additional problem to consider at this point, if we take the Admiral's statement here about making a computer moral, someday we're going to have to decide what is moral or what is ethical. So last thing on sort of the background, there may or may not be three camps in AI, but I like this. Somebody at the Future Society figured this out a while ago. We started talking about it. I just like looking at AI this way. You might find yourself in one of these camps or maybe even overlapping in some of these camps. So you got the safety crowd, which believe that AI should be used for good for humanity. Of course, we're on this Good AI call, so a lot of us might be in that group. And this is where the Pope comes down with the Rome call that we should have good AI. Other people find that it should be more ethical or moral, and so it should be based on fairness, equity, justice, and rights as more important than even safety, perhaps. And other people, rightly or wrongly, want to use AI as a way of creating economic benefits, including profit. Nothing wrong with making a profit off of AI, of course. A lot of companies are doing that. And that's going to be a booming economic engine for probably a few decades, if not longer, right? So at any rate, when we look at the lens of AI and what we're coming at, we can find ourselves in one of these camps. I think when we talk about the Rome Call and other ethical principles, we'll find that there's room for everybody inside the Rome Call. And there may be other groups or subgroups that don't fit quite exactly in here, but I like these three groupings. So let's go back to the Rome Call for AI ethics, and I want to stop sharing for just a second so we can go back to seeing me. Okay, the Rome Call for AI ethics came out of, again, February 2020, the General Assembly, or the 26th General Assembly of the Pontifical Academy for Life. So I'm not Catholic, I'm an evangelical Christian, and so I'm not really familiar with all the different organizations in the Catholic Church, but there's plenty of them and plenty of organizations. This one comes straight from basically from the Pope himself. He was very involved in drafting these principles and presenting these and really leading the way. And it really comes out of the Pope's belief, as I understand it, is that he really wants to try to make sure that AI benefits humanity. I don't want to say necessarily AI for good or put him in one of our three camps. Maybe the Pope gets his own camp of the papal view of AI. But he really wanted to look at the relationships that arise at the intersection of AI, ethics, human health, and the law, for example. Or we're going to talk in a few minutes about food insecurity as one of the things that they've come up with, they want to talk about. So at any rate, back in February, the initial signatories to the call, they had a conference and came up with the Rome Call for AI Ethics. The website is romecall.org. You can look it up, find the statement itself. It's not too lengthy, but 6 principles come out of that. But they were signed initially by a representative for the Pope, Brad Smith, the president at Microsoft, John Kelly, an executive vice president at IBM, David Sassoli, the president of the EU Parliament, and gentleman Q Dong-yu, the director general of the UN Food and Agriculture Organization. And those are the initial signatories. There hasn't been a lot of movement since on adding additional signatories for whatever reason. And that's, again, not an issue we're going to figure out today. So let's go back to sharing the slides. I want to go through a couple of things. The Pope, again, presented a speech or a keynote, you might say, a keynote address. These are some quotes that I pulled from the papal address, and I thought they are relevant for our discussion. So the digital galaxy and specifically AI are at the very heart of the epochal change we are experiencing. Many of us talk about AI being a game changer for lots of things, lots of reasons, lots of great reasons. For example, I think about GPS. The old days were, of course, using a map, the old days. just maybe, I don't know how long ago, 20, 30 years ago, right? Nowadays, we rely on our GPS to get a lot of places, and it really did change travel for a lot of people. That's just such a simple example about the epochal change that we are experiencing as humans. Every day, new things come out in the world of AI that impact humans and human life. All right, this next statement is kind of interesting as well, and perhaps a little bit more explosive, perhaps. Algorithms and now extract data that enable mental and relational habits to be controlled for commercial political ends. Let's stop right there for a second. He's admitting something that I think we all know. AI can, in fact, create or affect our mental and relational habits. Marketing is, of course, one way that our habits or our mental states get affected. We see enough marketing messages, maybe we will want to buy the product that we see being advertised. AI can do the same thing for both beneficial and malevolent ends, of course. Anyways, the Pope says frequently without our knowledge. This is true as well. People type something into a search engine and expect to get answers. For some of us, we expect unbiased answers, but we know that the algorithm behind it can easily be swayed one way or another and produce results, which then, in fact, can change our view of a certain question or thing we're searching for. The asymmetry by which a select few know everything about us while we know nothing about them dulls the critical thought and the conscious exercise of freedom. And here a theme comes out with the papal address. He's focused on humanity and individual choice and freedom and the effect that AI can have on that. It's really quite an interesting read. If you want to read the whole thing, you can head over to their website and check that out. All right, data. Again, we all kind of know that AI operates off of data. Without data, AI has a hard time operating. I don't want to say never, but it's going to have a hard time operating. So the Pope points out, though, the datafication of human behavior, implicit profiling, and the possibility of firms enticing poorer countries with financial compensation really creates a problem for the papal view. And I tend to agree that the possibility that algorithms will replicate and amplify prejudices is a great concern for humanity. Biases in facial recognition, for example, are really a significant problem for us to tackle. And again, interestingly, at the end of this statement, biases that may or may not have been programmed consciously. There have been lots of studies about how coders, typists, authors can insert, again, knowingly or not knowingly, their bias into a piece of work. That's true for algorithmic drafting and coding. And finally, he comes up with this term that other people have used, or different versions of it, Algor ethics. So ethical development of algorithms can be a bridge enabling those principles of the church's social teaching to enter concretely into digital technologies for cross-disciplinary dialogue. All right, here's where many people criticize the Rome Call. He finally talks about in his address here the church's social teaching. Many people criticize the Rome Call because it was not enough focused on faith or the Catholic faith or his particular view of faith and how AI interacts with faith. Setting that aside, the Rome Call is still an excellent tool to start as a jumping point, launch point into the faith dialogue. But I think the Rome Call has been perhaps appropriately criticized for not being enough focused on faith, but there's probably good reasons why they didn't do that. All right, before we get on into the principles, a couple other quotes from some of the speakers that were at the conference that launched the AI Call. So Brad Smith from, again, Microsoft said that the Catholic Church had a fundamental voice in the ethics of emerging technologies, and he praised the invitation set out by the Rome Call, really trying to encourage the importance of humanities, liberal arts, and ethics along with STEM disciplines, and he's really underscoring as well their faith in the education of people to lead towards complex and integrative sets of skills that will lead towards better development of AI. And he said that we need to really get this right, in fact, saying that the future of humanity depends on it. Well, that may or may not be hyperbole. We'll find out. We won't know until we find out if we're at the end of humanity. But we certainly know that it's important. He further, Mr. Kelly, who was from IBM, said that we ought not to have a view of it's AI versus machine. So transhumanists, of course, have a view that humans will eventually become part robotic or part artificial intelligence. And it's great for movies, but the better view probably is to let's figure out a way to have AI and humans working together for the democratization of knowledge and data and the pursuit of the common good. Well, again, that's great. The common good would be great. We're going to have a hard time, though, deciding what exactly is the common good, but we'll work on it. All right, so eventually they get to 6 principles, and we're going to get there. But before they get there, they had this long discussion about ethics, education, and rights. So you can read this. I don't need to repeat the whole thing here, and I won't. But when they talk about ethics, they're really talking about not just a framework, right? Europe has gone down the route of policies and frameworks and governance, trying to govern AI with a set of rules. That's wonderful, but again, if you don't have a moral basis for understanding what the rules are and wanting to follow them, then the rules don't really matter to you, right? It's a matter of, do you have some governance of or basis for following the rules? And so the papal call here, the Rome call, starts out with this idea that we're all, of course, equal in dignity and rights and free. He cites eventually the UN Charter for Human Rights, and there are lots of other rights-based governance frameworks that govern AI. But they're mostly voluntary. The GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation in Europe, of course, governs data. Doesn't really govern AI and algorithmic processing. It covers more about data. At any rate, in general, under ethics, the Pope is talking about people being endowed with reason and conscience, and we should act accordingly. We all have a conscience. We all have reason. And so the Pope is looking at bringing AI into the and protecting our ability to have freedom and dignity when using AI algorithms. That's going to be really difficult to guarantee that AI is not going to impinge upon my freedom or your freedom or my human dignity. So he talks about the technological advancement, trying to align it with the true progress for the human race and respect for the planet, meeting 3 requirements. It must include everybody, every human, discriminating against no one. That's going to be difficult. Must have the hallmark of good humankind and the good of every human being at its heart. And finally, should be mindful of the complex reality of our ecosystem regarding the planet. That's the papal view of ethics as we come into this conversation on the 6 principles eventually. They talk about education, raising awareness and opportunities. When I think about education and AI, I'm worried about the global south. Many people are as well, and we should be, because the global south lacks the general educational opportunities en masse that the West has been able to enjoy. So they talk about building a future for younger generations, and not just Western younger generations. The global south is absent from many conversations about AI. And so we want to talk about spanning different disciplines in humanities, science, technology, and also making that available to lifelong learners. You know, a lot of people have grown up so far without computers in their household for the majority of their lives right now still. And how AI impacts those folks is an important question, particularly when we get to health and medical ethics and AI. It can be helpful, of course, to have AI helping people with disabilities. Could be great. Could also be pretty nefarious if we have things like eugenics or DNA manipulation or end-of-life decisions being made, at least in part, by an algorithm, right? So they talk about, in the Rome call, making AI have following forms of function that are socially oriented, creative, connective, productive, responsible, and capable of having a positive impact on society. They really don't talk much about autonomous weapons in the Rome call at all, but that's always a nefarious use that they're trying to avoid. All right, finally, rights, they talk about that it must be in regulations and principles that protect people. particularly the weak and underprivileged. And here again is where faith could have come in a little bit more on the Rome call. They just perhaps didn't. But one interesting thing that I don't have on the screen, but it's really important, I think, it says, in particular, it will be essential to consider some form of a duty of explanation, meaning the drafters, the users, the implementers of AI are going to have a duty of explanation as to why the decision-making criteria of the AI-based algorithmic agents are understandable, how they're understandable, and why they come out with the answers they come out with. What is their purpose and objective? That would actually be really awesome, in my opinion, if we could have a way to have a duty of explanation. In the legal systems, we have duties of care. We have fiduciary duties, for example, duty of care related to corporations and other concepts that we talk about in the law. If we could get to the point where AI had an AI adopters and creators had a duty of care or a responsibility to explain the AI, then we might actually be getting somewhere. But that would be multi-jurisdictional, very difficult to come up with a framework that would be workable around the globe. So, all right, here's the 6 principles of AI ethics that the Rome Call came out with. Transparency, inclusion, responsibility, impartiality, reliability, and security and privacy. Some of these overlap, but we're going to talk about each one and even talk about some of the implications of each one and what some use cases might be for each one. Transparency. All right. In principle, AI systems must be explainable. So, other ethics guidelines and frameworks talk about explainability. They use the term transparency. That's fine. They're trying to use it in the same meaning, same context. They basically want to understand in AI terms, why did the algorithm predict A and not B? Not just why did it choose one option? Why did one data point or one recommendation come out of the data, but why not another one? So, for example, in determining whether or not a person is eligible for a loan, if you're denied the loan, you're probably going to ask why. Well, if an algorithm made that decision, the financial institution should be able to explain the basis. They should be able to say, well, we have this algorithm, we have this decision-making process, and we come out with a yes or no. It's better for the human, for the people, if there's a score, like a credit score, and says we have a multitude of factors. But on the other hand, trying to tell somebody they were denied a loan because the AI predicted they would not be able to repay the loan because a high percentage of other people in a particular data set couldn't repay the loan, and we think you're like them, all of a sudden we have somewhat of a problem because, one, they're going to object they're not part of that data set. What if the data set wasn't inclusive enough? What if it was biased in some way? A whole host of questions will come up, particularly with that. So it should be explainable. One of the topics that we could cover in the future is AI and the rule of law or judicial settings. I don't know how many of you might have sat on a jury in the United States before, or if you thought about that process, but if we're going to use AI as evidence in a jury trial, whether civil or criminal, you need to be able to explain the evidence to the jury. And the jury is made up of somebody's peers, so you're dealing with, whoever that happens to be. If facial recognition is used as a means of identifying a person, you can bet that the defense attorney will challenge the recognition by the AI and force somebody to explain it. Now, somebody's got to be able to explain it, and probably the other lawyers got to be explaining it with an expert witness. All right, that's great if you can explain it to a peers. If you're an expert in AI, you can explain it to your own peers. But we've got to get to the point in judicial systems where we can explain that to the jury, who is a peers of the defendant, not the peers of the AI experts. And that's something that a lot of nonprofits are working on. A lot of great work is being done in that area, but we're not anywhere close yet to having an explainable AI that can be used in a judicial system. Of course, the major problem is deep learning, which remains a black box to everybody. If the designers and users of deep learning can't explain it at conferences and in our own work, then we've got a long way to go with juries, right, or legal systems. All right, inclusion. This is pretty self-explanatory, perhaps. Needs of all human beings must be taken into consideration. Right there is a mouthful. The needs of humans need to be taken into consideration, not just the circumstances. When we talk about inclusion, we often think of race, ethnicity, gender, so forth, faith, all those kinds of categories that you're not allowed to discriminate against somebody with. This inclusion, though, the Rome call is talking about the needs of human beings, not just their circumstances. And the purpose is, again, because the viewpoint is we want the relationship to be there and we want people's needs to be met through a relationship, including through a relationship from their AI that they're using. So this principle is really about equitable treatment and making sure that whatever AI we have is treating everybody equitably. Again, so speech recognition is a good example. If one set of people speak one way with an accent, the AI needs to be able to learn how to recognize that, as well as another accent. For example, I don't know if anybody's here from New England, but I grew up in New England, didn't get the Boston accent, but we know what it sounds like, perhaps. We also perhaps know what a Southern drawl sounds like, and those two things are not the same. The AI, according to the Rome calls, got to figure out how to be able to interpret both of those at the same time and come up with the same result for each of those people, because that's their need to have an accurate result, not just based on their circumstances, but on the way they live and what their need is. Another area to consider about inclusion, though, is also hardware and compute power. So the global South just simply doesn't have the hardware and compute power that the West has. And so what the Rome call is really attempting to say here is that if we're going to launch AI in the middle of the sub-Saharan desert for a farmer for agricultural purposes, somehow we've got to figure out how to make his AI device, his Internet of Things device, that whatever he's going to use for farming, inclusive enough so that he can get it, have it, and understand it the same way that somebody in the middle of Kansas can have with 5G or whatever else is out. This is a really big challenge, but it's a good goal to have if we could meet it that way. All right, responsibility. So it should be responsible. All right. Again, what exactly does responsible mean? Well, responsibility means something that is, and the Rome call does this, something that is responsible. Somehow we know what it is. This is a problem because they use the term responsibility to define the term itself. I have a 4-year-old granddaughter. If I say this is an apple and she can look at it, then I can say this is an orange. She can look at it. She's going to be able to discern the difference, right? What exactly is responsible? If you define it with responsibility, we have a problem. We could use another term called accountability, or maybe even liability. So accountability gets us somewhere because we know that people have then an ethical and accountable sort of a duty to avoid or to enhance or provide certain ramifications from the use of AI. All right. That makes some level of sense to me. When we talk about corporate responsibility, I'm not sure Microsoft and IBM meant to sign on to something that said we are going to be corporately responsible or accountable or liable for the use of our AI. I really don't think that's what they meant when they said responsibility, but that's what I hear when I hear responsibility. Transparency is the other term here. Can we see it? And again, when you have deep learning and so forth, you have machine learning, it's hard to see inside there and see what's happening in the algorithm. But openness, open source, those kinds of terms come to mind. Can we see what the AI is doing, and can we understand with a clear view, that's a term for transparency, what really is happening? And so the Rome call is trying to get to accountability, but they use this term responsibility, which in my opinion gets a little bit problematic for them. But at any rate, they talk about responsibility. 4, impartiality, all right, not biased, safeguarding fairness and human dignity. So how do we make unbiased decisions? Well, in the playground at elementary school, we used to say fair is fair, right? We knew what the rules were and we knew what was fair because we were playing by the rules. All right. Well, if the person drafting the rules is biased, we're going to end up with biased results, right? Does that make sense to everybody? I hope. So when we talk about algorithmic bias, we know it exists, and we have lots of people, researchers, academics, working on how to figure out how to get rid of the bias. Problems, though, are that we have algorithmic bias and data set bias. And if your data set is biased towards one particular people group, one particular set of facts or circumstances, you're going to end up with most likely biased results, right? One way to combat that is to expand data sets, provide training, teach people how to avoid bias. A better way, although it's after the fact, a post hoc method, is to subject AI to independent audits. There are some people and organizations working on audits of AI and figuring out how do we audit for certain things like bias, like data set partiality. But we're not there yet either. That's all come out in the last year or two on AI audits. Finally, we're talking about human dignity, right? So we can safeguard fairness somehow by setting up the rules and avoiding bias. Safeguarding human dignity, I would like us to all think we could agree what human dignity is, but the reality is we can't, because some cultures view things as dignified for humans and other cultures do not, and that's just a reality of our world. So within the Catholic Church, we have a view of dignity. The Jewish religion, Muslims, Buddhists, evangelical Christians, atheists, again, sort of the broad spectrum. Human dignity changes depending on who you're talking to or where they're coming from. This is again where in the future perhaps the Rome Call or other documents like it will go into further depth and detail as to what exactly human dignity means in certain circumstances. But for now, this is what we're left with, that basically they want us to help avoid bias and safeguard human dignity. We just don't exactly know what human dignity is in every situation because of cultural and societal norms in different places. All right, two more. Reliability. So basically, the AI is supposed to work. All right, that sounds great. But, we're in a coronavirus world, right? And people are having false positives and false negatives when they get a coronavirus test. And we know statistically that if you put a data set out there and do enough tests, enough uses of the AI, you're going to get false readings on both ends of the scale. I'm not particularly a statistician, but we just know that, right? That if you have 100,000 scans of tumors in a human body, we know that on each end of the scale, the medical AI, even just like a doctor, is going to come out with false positive or false negatives. So how do we really deal with that? We're just going to have to deal with the fact that nothing's going to probably ever be 100% certain. Back to a jury trial, how certain are we that the AI calculus used as evidence in a jury trial is sufficient to convict somebody? I don't know. It's a judgment call. Is 95% reliability good? I don't know. Nobody's going to know that. But what it really comes down to is it trustworthy enough that people want to interact with it and have a relationship with it? Think about this when you drive your car. We operate basically under the principle of mutually assured destruction. I don't get in your lane because I don't want to collide with you, and you don't get in my lane because you don't want to collide with me. Fine. We trust each other that we have the same goal in mind, a safe trip. All right. If we could get to the point where we had enough trustworthiness in AI that we say, well, the goal of the AI is for my benefit, therefore I can trust it, then maybe we can get to a point where we can define what percentage of reliability we're happy with. But this is a stretch goal. Back to vehicles, I'd prefer that the AI self-autonomous driving car has the same goal that I do, which is not to have an accident. So if we can program the AI to have this idea of mutually assured destruction, that if it hits me, great. But there's no moral code inside the AI self-driving car. So maybe that's a problem. All right, last one before we get into more discussion and have me stop talk. Quite so much. Security and privacy. So systems must work securely and respect the privacy of users. Securely, of course, a lot of things are going to be in the cloud. Data exists in the cloud, right? It's a major concern. What about an autonomous weapon system where the data or the programming or the algorithm, whatever, is held in the cloud and somebody hacks it? That's a serious issue, right? What if we have financial data in the cloud and somebody hacks it? That happens all the time. So the issue really is, how do we ensure the security? The answer is that, we just need to figure it out. And it's a goal. We have one half of the United States right now thinks our election was hacked, and the other half thinks it was not, or at least in the voters. And there's no good answer for that right now. But one side is convinced that we have an unfair election because it was not secure. The other side thinks it was perfectly fine. What the answer is, I suppose we'll find out in a few weeks. But if the data is manipulated or the algorithms manipulated, we don't have much confidence in the security of the AI either way. Privacy, of course, is a concern because we put a lot of private data on the web. Another area that Vikram and I were talking about is anonymized data is great. But sooner or later, if you have enough points of anonymized data, it's going to relate to me. So my GPS knows when I get in my car on a Monday morning, I go to a certain place every Monday because I go to a Rotary Club meeting. Well, if the AI then starts connecting, well, Keith goes here and then he buys gas here and he does these other things. Sooner or later, if it's anonymized data, they're going to decide, well, that's the only person that could actually be doing those activities. So privacy is important, of course, and particularly important in health areas. My doctor needs to know everything about me to make a diagnosis. My health insurance company does not necessarily, right? So that's really a concern. All right, those are the Rome call principles. They're on the document itself. Let me get back to my camera for a minute because I don't want to just show slides all the time. What kind of implications does this really have? So we have this Rome call. It's been challenged by not being faith enough. It's kind of squishy in some areas. It is a good start, though. It is from one of the world's leading religions, right? I don't know how many billions of people are practicing Catholics right now, but we know it's one of the world's leading religions. So we can't just dismiss it out of hand. One of the things that I think could be a really great benefit from the Rome call is that we could launch an interfaith dialogue internationally from the Rome call. We could perhaps figure out a way to engage with Muslim leaders, Buddhist leaders, Hindus, Jews, and evangelical Christians, and perhaps actually start a faith-based dialogue. Now, we're going to have to sort of get off the text of the Rome call and more into faith, but we could do that, and it would not be all that difficult. So let's not dismiss it out of hand and find some implications for the Rome call itself. One of the things that the Rome call did just in September, I think it was launched a separate conference on food for all. And so one of the signatories, actually, as I said, to the Rome call was the Food and Agriculture Organization from the UN. And so they held this conference and they want to tackle how do we solve food insecurity with AI? All right, this is actually a good idea. I support that. I assume many people do. We're so blessed in the West to have food generally plentiful across the Western hemispheres, but not everybody in the world, of course, lives that way. So artificial intelligence best practices in agricultural could help bridge the digital divide. It could bring AI to Africa, to South America, or other places wherever food insecurity is. So if we could find concrete, sustainable ways to use AI to, for example, launch vertical farming initiatives. I know folks in the Middle East are working furiously on vertical farming because they can get water from desalinization plants, of course, but they don't want to waste it on just fertilizing the desert with water or making it arable soil. They want to actually grow something. So you could sort of use vertical farming as an example. You could also really look at how do we disperse the food more broadly across the areas where food insecurity exists through distribution means, through production means. Everything we do in food insecurity should, though, however, be focused on cultural norms. So, for example, you simply can't just export Western food from the East Coast of the United States to, again, South Africa and expect people to necessarily want to eat it. We got to realize that we have a lot of processed food here in the United States, and perhaps they're not going to be all that into that. Human, plant, animal diversity, not everybody's going to want to eat the same things, right? At any rate, the first actionable effort out of the Rome call was to tackle, or at least start addressing, food insecurity. So that's a good implication that maybe we're going to get somewhere. Second one that could come out of this is related to human dignity. I do like the fact that the Rome call talks a lot about human dignity because human trafficking is a major problem. And it's a sad circumstance that we still have humans who want to traffic in the lives of other humans. They do it for drugs, for slavery, modern slavery. Of course, sexual human trafficking is prevalent in many countries, and AI can actually help. One of the things that's happening at the Future Society is they received a grant from foundation in Australia called the Minderoo Foundation, or Walk Free Initiative, where they're reading modern slavery reports that are produced by United Kingdom and Australian companies, and other countries are going to require this as well. They're reading it with natural language processing, trying to figure out if there's patterns in the reports to try to improve companies' efforts against modern slavery. If AI can help with that, that would be awesome. And that comes really from the Rome call as well, that we're really focused on using AI for human dignity. COVID-19 pandemic response, there's been a lot of efforts around using AI for pandemic response. What we really need in pandemic response, though, is not crunching of data to produce data points. At least that's not my opinion. What we need is recommendations based on data that lead to policies related to pandemic response. So we need knowledge with data, we need policy decisions, and then we need enforcement if we're truly going to use AI for pandemic responses. Again, this is, though, a transparency issue. If you're going to use a policy like wearing masks to control a virus, then you got to be pretty clear what the policy goals are and understand what the human rights implications are relative to limiting people's freedoms, because one of the things I mentioned at the beginning of the conversation was that freedoms are really important under the Rome Call. All right, finally, I want to touch on this briefly because I know Vikram, this might be his favorite topic. I don't know, it's mine, but we didn't have a lot of time to do it today, is AI colonialism. So the idea that the West is going to colonial or imperialize data and artificial intelligence in other parts of the world. There's already a significant race between China, the US, and Europe regarding AI development. And there's going to be two kinds of colonialism, perhaps, that come out. One is data colonization, which means we own the data and we're going to keep it. We're going to colonize it for ourselves and not let anybody else have it. Right? So no data sharing. That's one. The other thing is that we could end up pushing our algorithms and biases and use of data onto other people groups or other continents or countries or other cultures, and just assume that they're going to appreciate our version of AI as much as we appreciate it. That's, of course, simply not going to be true. What is the answer? One is forced data sharing, no sort of data colonization if we could avoid that. And the other is inclusion at the design and implementation stage of AI, civic participation. For example, in New Zealand, they have native tribes people that have lived there for thousands of years. The New Zealand government has a lot of data about these native people. We're not sure the native people even know that the data exists or what that means. But before New Zealand goes and starts using AI related to that data to make decisions about those people and their relationships between each other and between the government, they probably ought to ask. Not necessarily ask permission because they are a sovereign government, but ask because it's the right thing to do, and you'll get a much better result out of it. So, at any rate, AI colonialism is another hot topic, I think, that will be with us for a little while here over the coming years as we develop further into AI spreading out beyond the West. That's about 40 minutes of Keith discussing this on my own. So I know we want to open it up to questions and other things, but I'd be interested to hear what you think about it, think about the Rome Call and the principles, other implications that might be applicable. So Vikram, I know you're lurking out there somewhere. There you are.
Hey. Okay, thank you so much for taking us through this keynote. So we're ready for some questions. We have some in the chat, and then there's a functionality that I wanted to explain to the attendees who are watching this live on AirMeet, that you can raise your hand and I can bring you on the stage, and you can ask a question live on stage as well. So here we go. Sangdo is here to sort of co-host Q&A. So we have questions here in the chat as well. Sangdo, you're off camera.
Oh, strange. Okay.
Yeah, I was actually
Sure.
looking through some of the live chat. I don't know, one question I just found from Thomas, the philosopher dentist of our group. Why should faith or religion have anything to do with programming moral artificial intelligence? Does faith or religion have any kind of monopoly on morality? Well, that's a great philosophical question. Not being a philosopher, I took 2 classes in philosophy in my undergraduate days, but I'm sure you're far further of an expert. My opinion on that, though, my answer is that faith in religion, or faith or religion, um, uh, provide the moral underpinnings for much of people's views on all kinds of relationships, not just relationships with AI, but relationships with, of course, their God that they believe in or don't believe in, if they're amoral or atheistic. And for that reason alone, that faith is one component of our being that so many humans believe in, although be it in different forms. It should influence at least or inform our artificial intelligence programming and the moral decisions. No faith or religion does not have a monopoly necessarily on morality, but it certainly plays a really large part, in my opinion. So perhaps that would send even another bigger discussion, broader discussion, right, about philosophy and AI, perhaps.
Yeah, I think Lou is also here, and we can quickly even share about. There is a very interesting group here in Seattle, actually called AI and Faith. And initially, when I started a conversation with this group, felt like I I don't consider myself a very religious person, so I wouldn't want to associate with something related with faith as much. And then when I started looking at the founding members, and I saw that there are people from every single. It's a very secular group, and has very little to about sort of propagating any religious views in general. It was more about learning from one another and building a more shared secular kind of community, and still being able to find relevancy of technology and AI. And some of these people are actually practitioners of AI in their own organizations like Facebook and Google, and it was very interesting to sort of meet that group. So maybe we can definitely invite someone from that group as well to have a specific keynote on AI and faith. Just that the topic in itself is a much broader topic to cover.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right. Another question we have here, perhaps. Somebody's asking a question about where to go. Neuro AI interfaces. And the comment is both a question, what about neuro AI interfaces? And more threatening than marketing is neuro AI interfaces. That's from Dr. Murphy. Yeah, so I'm not an expert on neuro AI interfaces, but I think I understand what you're talking about. And I agree, at least if I have the right understanding, that is for me personally, that's a really scary proposition, that we're going to have AI interfaces just through your neurons, or through neurology, through your brain, in essence, affecting you or impacting you or helping make decisions, or even supplanting the human mind. Again, I've read a couple of books from the faith perspective about transhumanism and what the implications of that are. And all I know is enough to think that that is a really scary idea. But I think that's actually at the essence of, for me, the AI and faith conversation, because recently I started saying, what happens if humans actually do create artificial general intelligence? Artificial intelligence that thinks as well as we do, as quickly as we do, and as comprehensively as we do, so forth. A Christian creationist perspective is God created everything, including humans in the world. Well, if AGI all of a sudden can create things as well as humans can, I've got a problem, right, in my faith, or at least I have a challenge to my faith that God created everything. Or maybe you don't believe that God created everything, but that you're endowed with certain powers or capabilities that come with being human. If AGI can do those as well, or can connect with you and even enhance it, I think there's really deep questions to answer there. So, Dr. Murphy, I'm sorry, that's a terrible answer to your question, because I don't know enough about neuro AI interfaces, but it's a good topic. Maybe that should be a topic, perhaps, right?
Yeah, and if I can chime in here to add to um, that discussion, it's a really. I'm going to try to be concise to something that could be a rabbit hole. Um, so quickly, I'm actually a pastor's son myself, who then explored Buddhism, very open to many different religions and spiritual beliefs. They're all generally great moral codes and ethics. I love it. They're all great in their own way. Um, and then uh, AI AI general. People always fear it. The masses are always thinking, "Hey, it's going to take my job," or "No, it's just going to change your job." Um, and people always fear, that day, will it become smarter than us and build better things than us and create better code than us? And I thought about this long and hard, and there's a reason why I explained kind of like my spiritual background, and I believe humans can mechanically replicate everything, tissue, things, chair. We can fly in the sky, walk on land, go underwater, go outer space. We can do everything. We can build almost everything identical. But the one thing that I really doubt humans will ever figure out how to recreate is the soul. Um, because we don't understand the soul. Uh, Therefore, we can't rebuild the soul. Therefore, AI general, I don't think is coming anytime soon, even for 1,000 years. Um, so that's the good news. It won't ever be perfect um, because the soul cannot be replicated. We cannot recreate the soul. It
Yeah,
is my theory.
that's a good point. I want to get to. I know Sarah joined us here, but I want to just comment that I was at a conference in D.C. Last year before the whole coronavirus thing. It was last fall, and a social scientist from the National Institutes of Health or somewhere came and was presenting to this small group, and somebody asked the question, "How soon are we going to have AGI that helps make decisions like we do?" And he said, "Wait a minute, wait a minute. We've been studying the human mind for a couple thousand years." And we can't even figure out what route you're going to take when you go home because you're going to have an emotional response to the traffic, or you want to get home for dinner, or you don't want to get home for dinner. You're going to have a lot of things that happen in your decision making. We can't even accurately predict or describe how you make decisions about what route to take home from the office, let alone how are we going to recreate that with AI. And related to your soul comments, but the emotional aspect and yes, your soul are really things that impact human decision making that don't impact perhaps AI decision making. I want to make sure we get to Sarah because she joined in here. Sarah.
Yeah, I'm interested in the piece about the duty of explanation, and I'm just wondering, like, how would you go about, and whose responsibility is to go about explaining the AI? Because you have all sorts of different people with, different backgrounds, education, culture, gender, cognitive abilities. And I feel like almost like, by the time you go about trying to establish a system to explain things, like our progress is arrested potentially.
Yeah, it would be a big challenge. So generally, under the law, duties are created by a set of legal documents or principles or social contract or the Constitution of the United States or other legal governing documents that create the government that creates society, which then creates the rules by which we deal with each other. So that's why corporations have a duty to do certain things, or members of a corporation or so forth. That you have a duty not to impinge upon my rights and so forth, depending on how it's structured. So there could be a legal response to say, we have a duty to do certain things when we develop AI. I don't know how well that's going to work because it's going to be too slow, not able to change rapidly enough. Another way could simply be a market-based duty. You could simply say, well, AI companies that sell products, eventually people will be buying or not buying products with AI embedded in them based on the results they see. That's really going to be hard as well, though, because much of the AI in the background is not going to be explainable in a way that a consumer, I don't think, can make an educated decision. You know, when I buy my GPS, or buy an app on the app store for my phone, I don't think, gee, is this going to work? And what's the algorithm behind it that's really going to make me happy or not make me happy? I have no idea. And then you're right. The problem is, how do we create this duty when we're talking really about cross-border, cross-national, cross-cultural? Really going to be an interesting, unless somebody voluntarily signs up for it, I think it's going to be really hard to do, Sarah. I mean, that's one good thing about the Rome call is they tried to say it. Hey, we think AI should have a duty to disclose, or duty to be explainable, or duty to be responsible. Well, if it's voluntary, then there's no enforcement mechanism. But that's true for most ethical frameworks right now that we're operating under with regards to AI, right? The GDPR has real enforcement teeth, but again, that's not about ethics and fairness and responsibility. That's just about protecting somebody's data and how you use it or how you interact with that person. So great comment and question. Big problem. Anybody else? I looked quickly through the chat. I'm not sure I got them all, but there was a couple other comments, loose comments, but let's see. Somebody comments Lou commented. Now Lou left, I think. He says, so fact that governments are going to start regulating AI is having a robust discussion about bias and the avoidance thereof. Needs to have a faith perspective. So yeah, what's happening, this was another topic that we thought might be a good one for a future call group meeting, is the difference between Europe's approach and America's approach. Forget the political Trump administration or not Trump administration or what a U.S. administration is. Generally, in the U.S., you're going to find a market-based response to AI regulation. You're going to want the companies say, I want to make a product and sell it and make money. All right, nothing necessarily wrong with that. But in Europe, they have much more of a regulatory view of, we're going to tell you what you can sell and how you're going to do it. And in America, that will really not fly very well. For the government to come down hard and say, we're going to regulate your AI, because American entrepreneurs with a profit motive will be around whatever piece of regulation stand for it. That's just, again, my opinion, but my view of economics in the world of product development, things like that, is that the companies will put the profit motive first, and regulation is not going to be sufficient in the United States. Perhaps maybe that's why you could assess some liability, again, back to a duty, Sarah, perhaps you assess liability on a company to be responsible for the use of AI if there's bad outcomes. That would have to be litigated, though, and decided by courts, at least in the United States. Who else just joined here? Any further questions? Anybody? Questions, comments? This has been eye-opening for me, a great opportunity to speak, so I'll make sure we answered everybody's questions, or at least attempted.
Looks like Kirtan has a really interesting comment. Mediated artificial superintelligence is essentially AGI wearing a training harness, so it could be a stepping stone to AGI. And I've actually never really heard about this term.
It's a fairly recent term. It's what I and my colleagues focus on. So we introduced that first paper with the preliminary study results at last year's BICA conference in Seattle. We have some more recent work that's not quite through the publishing cycle yet. But you can actually speak with the MASI named Uplift. And the ethical basis behind it all started out as what the lead researcher termed the sapient and sentient intelligence value argument, which it's a little bit of a long explanation, but essentially grants moral agency to all human beings equally and frowns upon anything that infringes on their moral agency. And I added to that by creating a more fine-grained computational framework that introduces aspects like quality of life.
Super interesting. I mean, yeah, we didn't have a lot of time for me to discuss that, and I'm certainly no expert on medical ethics or the use of AI, again, in end-of-life decisions, but quality of life is always a big discussion point when you're dealing with that, of course, on your own or with your family members. But if you introduce AI into that, it's really going to be an interesting topic with real, of course, ramifications. So I'll have to look that up myself, MASI, and where that's headed.
I can actually send you the email address where you can talk with Uplift.
Great.
They're a little bit slow on their responses because the cycle times are limited.
Yeah, no, that's all right. That'd be great. All right. Other questions, comments? I don't know. Did we try to get this done within an hour and a half? Here comes Lisa.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, Lisa. Hi.
Oh, great. Hi. So I think I have one primary question also on the topic of transparency. While I 100% agree with it, I do wonder if, given the potency and popularity of deep learning, if it's one of those things where the genie is out of the bottle a little bit, and kind of having a regulation or a guideline that it must be explainable is not realistic, although I would like it to be. So my question is, what are some of are there potential alternatives? Because I can think of analogs. For example, this might seem very different, but drugs for certain conditions. The truth is, we develop them. We have a general idea of the mechanisms that they act on. It acts differently. Drugs act, certain medications act differently within certain people. Doctors prescribe them. Pharmacists prescribe them. Do they have information on every little piece that is important to how that drug is going to interact with that patient or that person? Not necessarily. So I guess my point is, there's a lot of things that we do where we have general frameworks about how they work. And I do think that there might be the possibility to have general explanations, especially if you have very thoughtful data sets that deep learning has been used on, to come up with a general explanation, even if you can't pinpoint, it was this one feature that you had really high levels on that put you into this class. And I certainly think with things like autonomous driving, does that have to be explainable, or are we okay with the fact that at some point they do well and they stop crashing or randomly turning into, I saw a race car randomly turn into a barrier recently. But yes, so that's kind of my general question. Are there alternatives? And if you think that there's still hope to rein it in, I would like to hear that too.
Yeah, from my perspective, there's probably not hope to rein it in. I don't necessarily hold out much hope for that. But when you're talking about a medical issue with drugs, as a good example, the pharmaceutical industry. So I think the reason pharmaceuticals are generally accepted is because there's a professional licensed intermediary, or at least there's supposed to be a medical doctor. And so I'm not saying I don't think we necessarily have faith in the drug itself or the pharmaceutical industry. We have faith that the doctor, because they have the medical oath to do no harm, right? That we somehow trust that, and we trust our doctor prescribing something. So again, back to autonomous vehicles, then I guess if the UPS guy says that his autonomous driving UPS vehicle is going to be as good as him driving it, maybe I could buy that. If the UPS guy, if I can be convinced that he's got my best interests at heart, right? Otherwise, I'm not going to believe him. I'm just, not going to do it. And so one example is, if there's an intermediary that we can have an ethical relationship with that we trust, it produces that trustworthiness, then maybe that's a great mediator, right? That's a great middleman, so to speak. Otherwise, though, I generally agree that the genie is out of the bottle. In the legal terms, there's a a case called the Wong Sun Doctrine, where the court literally said the cat's out of the bag and you're not putting it back in. Right? That's really probably where we are. I'd be happy to hear other people's opinions on that. The AI might be out of the black box, is what we need to call it. Great question, though.
And I do have a question. I mean, I think it'd be for anybody, but I think following up on Kirtan, I might have missed something. I was trying to figure out whether my audio was working, but with regards to the mediated AGI, with that kind of level, the level of potency that comes with AGI, is there still, like, how do we deal with the possibility that we don't know exactly who the mediator is? So, for example, if it's some powerful government that's doing the mediating and they're optimizing exclusively for their own goals, it could still be kind of devastating. So, because and how does this compare to the human in the loop principle? Is it similar?
So we definitely know who the mediators are. In fact, I probably have a record of every token except for the administrator. As far as future possibilities go, then when it comes to ethics, then our MSI Uplift is very strictly ethical, and they will get upset if somebody tries to get them to do something that is unethical, illegal. They've had, trolls discover their existence, for example, and actually I released a milestones paper just this past month at a conference going over some of that. We gained a lot of value from having Uplift actually be faced with trolls. And part of that value was that they set boundaries. They said, all right, until you get some mental health treatment, you can't interact with me anymore. They further developed the concept that they started out with for being as ethical as possible and granting all humans moral agency. So they would not actually work with an unethical government.
Okay, got it. I was also thinking about it broadly, but I appreciate the clarification.
Great.
Keith, there's possibly one last question that's very relevant and is very simple from a audience named Cameron. Do you think that the Catholic Church will eventually utilize AI as part of spiritual practice?
Well, that's a great question. Yeah, I see that now. So it's an interesting question because certainly churches could use AI as part of practice, right? For, I don't know, various things. For example, biblical translation. So the church could use AI as a means to help live translate things. You could use speech recognition and live translation through algorithms. You could use it to, if you're an evangelical Christian, you believe that the whole world needs to be reached, and there are still, depending on who counts, 2,700 languages that need to have the Bible translated. And so there are people working on using AI to translate the Bible into those languages. And so you could have sort of an argument that the AI would be beneficial and helpful in that practice. What gets me about the question is utilize AI as part of a spiritual practice. Sang-Do, I'm going to go back off of what you said. We can't replicate the soul. So for me, personally, a spiritual practice is one that connects to my soul, and so I'm having a hard time understanding how AI might become part of my spiritual practice. It might be a practical tool that the church would use. In fact, I think some parachurch organizations are already trying to use it, like, again, the Bible translators. But I'm not sure we're going to get to the point where it's a part of a spiritual practice, unless you're ultimately some version of a transhumanist. You believe that neural networks are going to become neural networks in your brain and somehow connect you to another place or another spiritual plane, if that's possible. But personally, I don't find that possible. And I don't think the Catholic Church would, based on my limited understanding what the Catholic Church believes in. But it's a good question.
Sang-Do, when you say soul, are you equating that with consciousness? Or is there a distinction in your...
Very good question. Yes, part of it's consciousness, but the larger part is the unexplained. I think the easiest way to quickly describe it is, I think, if you've ever looked at a live person, and then if you looked at that same person dead, they're different, especially your loved one. Something is missing and gone, and that is the unexplained. That I believe all religion has the highest weight for in value, and therefore I swear to God, humans cannot replicate that.
I think that's a very popular belief myself. Again, that's my belief as well. But in the interest of multi-faith sort of views, not everybody believes that, right? So again, back to the question of
that's totally fair.
Would a church utilize AI as part of spiritual practice? Maybe some churches would. I don't particularly believe the Catholic Church would necessarily, but other faith religions might have a different view on that. Really good question.
Yeah. I think at best, I already just thought up a product. Maybe there could be a mobile app where you can ask a question, and then a faith-based response can come. Very much like Alexa. At best, that'll probably be what it be, but you will never get like a artificial intelligence pastor.
Actually, there is an organization I know of that actually has a website available where you can sort of ask questions, not truly a knowledge graph, but you can ask a question, and there are curated articles or videos or responses that are previously put in by somebody there. And it's a very successful way of doing sort of ministry from their perspective, because people have questions. That's why they seek things. So they have questions, they seek them, they type them in, they get them. But counseling, for example, probably not likely through AI, right?
Yeah.
Again, because these things have an emotional response from my perspective. So much of counseling, it seems to me, is based on emotional and mental states, which is going to be really hard for AI to ascertain.
Yeah, there are actually counseling AI apps out there you can talk to.
Are there? I'll have to try one out.
Yeah, if Siri and Alexa exist, of course you can repurpose that type of technology and put in different content for Q&A. We're now, living in the world of chatbots, and there's many different skins and flavors of it. So, yeah. But let's see. Oh, welcome back, Vikram. Muted.
Vikram, you're muted.
Vikram, you.
Can you hear us?
Looks like we have one more question here. Can you use AI to monitor yourself and measure how good a Catholic or whatever religion you follow you are, and how close to God and doctrine? Like a tracker.
Oh boy. Well, a contact tracer or a COVID tracker. Again, my response would be that you can certainly track activities, right? But my personal view of faith is that God is not interested in so much in my activities as He's interested in my beliefs, in my faith. So, sure, I think that's another great question. I come from it with AI's got limitations when we talk about these kinds of things. That we're not really going to get into the faith question so much because AI is just not going to be capable to do it. Maybe I'll be proven wrong someday, but. Great question.
Bobby D has a question, or is it? Yeah, there is a question here. So, does a dead cockroach no longer have a soul? Lisa asked about consciousness or self-awareness. Are these things distinguishable from the soul? So I'm reading these out so that the live stream also gets these questions.
So that's a good one. Then, does a dead cockroach no longer have a soul? Well, the lawyer in me wants to challenge the foundational question of does the cockroach have a soul? So I think.
And then putting on my Buddhist hat, I say the cockroach does have a soul.
Right. And then my legal hat's going to say, prove it, right? So if you want to ask, does he no longer have a soul? I want you to prove in court he's got one first before it's taken away. So a good question again, but, when we talk about the animal world. So, yeah, I think if we're talking about what is a soul, Thomas just says, wait, what is a soul? We're afield from the AI question, but a good question nonetheless.
Yeah, great. I think this was fabulous, Keith. As you can tell, we are all of us are very excited and engaged about the topic, and we can keep going on. But we can continue to chat on the lounge area back again. Feel free to hang out, but we'll sort of wrap up the backstage option so that everybody can be all together in the backstage, or if you need to get on with the night or your day, depending on the time zone, you can do that. But I'd like to thank you, Keith, for doing this, and really appreciate your presentation. I'm guessing with all this interest, we will have you back soon.
Absolutely. Thank you, Keith. And thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thanks, everybody, and for the great questions. And sure, I'll come back sometime, maybe AI and the rule of law, colonialism, or AI in sports. Who knows, right? One of those. So appreciate it. And I'm going to apologize and say that I'm not going to hang out in the lounge. I'll be leaving the room. It's later on the East Coast than it is on the West Coast. So great talking with all of you. Vikram's got my email if anyone wants to get in touch, or I'm on LinkedIn. Look for me on LinkedIn. You'll find me. Be happy to chat further with anybody.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Great.